Battle of Yamen. On March 19, 1279, the Song dynasty navy faced the Yuan forces in the waters off Guangdong province. This was not just another naval engagement, this was the final stand of an empire that had ruled China for more than 3 centuries. Prime Minister Lu Shifu stood on the deck of a Song warship with the young Emperor Zhao Bing at his side. The child was only 8 years old. The battle had turned decisively against the Song fleet. Yuan ships surrounded them on all sides. The Song vessels were being destroyed one by one. There was no path to retreat, no possibility of escape. Lu Shifu watched as his navy fell apart around him. He understood what this meant. The dynasty was finished. The prime minister made his decision. He took the child emperor into his arms. Without hesitation, he walked to the edge of the ship and jumped into the sea. They drowned in the waters off Guangdong. Other Song officials witnessed what their prime minister had done. They understood the message. The empire was lost. There was nothing left to preserve. One by one, officials and servants began following Lu Shifu into the water. They jumped from ships across the fleet. Some held family members, some jumped alone. The surface of the sea filled with bodies. The drownings continued as the Yuan forces watched from their vessels. Historical records indicate that over 100,000 people died in the waters that day. Officials, soldiers, servants, and their families chose to drown rather than live under Yuan rule. The Battle of Yamen ended with the complete destruction of the Song dynasty. The Yuan forces took control of all China. The child emperor's body was never recovered from the sea. The 300-year-old Song dynasty ended in the waters off Guangdong on March 19, 1279. Siege of Tenochtitlan. By the spring of 1521, the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan had been under siege for months. Hernán Cortés commanded Spanish forces alongside thousands of indigenous allies who surrounded the island city in the middle of Lake Texcoco. The Spanish strategy was simple and brutal. Cut off all food supplies, cut off all fresh water, wait for the city to starve. Inside Tenochtitlan, conditions deteriorated rapidly. The defenders had no access to supplies from the mainland. They began eating whatever they could find. Historical accounts describe people consuming roots pulled from the ground and strips of leather from their equipment. The population was starving. On August 13, 1521, Spanish forces launched their final assault. They breached the city's defenses and poured into Tenochtitlan. What followed was a massacre. The Spanish and their allies moved through the streets, killing thousands of civilians who were too weak from starvation to resist. The defenders who tried to fight back were overwhelmed by the attacking forces. Emperor Cuauhtémoc attempted to escape by canoe across the lake. Spanish forces intercepted him and brought him back to the destroyed city. His capture marked the end of organized Aztec resistance. The empire that had dominated central Mexico collapsed within hours of the emperor's capture. The Spanish took control of what remained of Tenochtitlan. The city had been reduced to ruins during the siege. Bodies filled the streets and canals. The survivors were scattered or enslaved. The Aztec Empire, which had ruled the region for nearly 2 centuries, ceased to exist on August 13, 1521. Cortés would later order the complete destruction of the city and the construction of Mexico City on top of its ruins. Emperor Cuauhtémoc remained a prisoner of the Spanish until they game-overed him 4 years later. Jingshan Park. On April 25, 1644, rebel forces led by Li Zicheng breached the walls of Beijing. Emperor Chongzhen of the Ming dynasty faced the collapse of everything his family had built over nearly 3 centuries. The Forbidden City was about to fall. The emperor knew his reign was finished. Chongzhen rang the bell to summon his ministers for an emergency meeting. Nobody appeared. His officials had either fled the city or switched sides to the rebels. The emperor was abandoned. He retreated from the Forbidden City with only his faithful eunuch accompanying him. They walked to Jingshan Park, a hill directly behind the imperial palace. The city burned around them. Rebel forces were moving through Beijing street by street. The sounds of chaos filled the air. In the park, Emperor Chongzhen made his final decision. He bit down on his own finger until it bled. Using his blood as ink, he wrote a final note. He then approached a pagoda tree on the hill. The emperor removed his belt and fashioned it into a noose. His eunuch stood nearby but could not stop what happened next. Chongzhen placed the makeshift noose around his neck and hanged himself from the tree. His body hung there as the Ming dynasty capital fell completely to rebel control. Servants discovered the emperor's body the following day. The blood-written note was found with him. Li Zicheng's forces took control of Beijing and declared the end of Ming rule. The dynasty that had governed China since 1368 ended with an emperor hanging from a tree in Jingshan Park. The Qing dynasty would soon take power, but the Ming line died on April 25, 1644, behind the walls of the Forbidden City. Walls of Constantinople. On May 29, 1453, the Ottoman army launched its final assault on Constantinople. The city had withstood siege for 53 days. Sultan Mehmed II commanded over 80,000 troops outside the ancient walls. Inside, Emperor Constantine XI had fewer than 7,000 defenders to protect the capital of the Byzantine Empire. The Ottomans had been bombarding the walls with massive cannons for weeks. On this morning, they concentrated their attack on a weakened section near the St. Romanus Gate. The walls began to crumble. Ottoman soldiers poured through the breach and into the city. Byzantine defenders fought desperately to push them back, but they were vastly outnumbered. Emperor Constantine XI received reports that the walls had been breached. His advisors urged him to flee the city while there was still time. Ships were waiting at the harbor to carry him to safety. The emperor refused. He tore off his imperial ornaments and threw them aside. He would not die as an emperor running away. He would die as a soldier defending his city. Constantine led his remaining guards toward the St. Romanus Gate. They charged directly into the advancing Ottoman forces. The fighting was brutal and close. The emperor and his men were surrounded and overwhelmed by enemy soldiers. Constantine fell somewhere near the gate during the final defense. His body was never definitively identified among the thousands of dead. Some accounts claim Ottoman soldiers found a body wearing purple boots, a sign of imperial rank, but confirmation was impossible. The Byzantine Empire ended with the fall of Constantinople on May 29, 1453. The Roman Empire, which had existed in some form for over 2,000 years, ceased to exist that day at the walls of Constantinople. Cajamarca. On November 16, 1532, Francisco Pizarro's forces captured Emperor Atahualpa in the Peruvian city of Cajamarca. The Inca ruler had arrived with thousands of attendants to meet the Spanish conquistador. Pizarro had fewer than 200 men, but they had weapons and tactics the Inca had never encountered. The Spanish slaughtered Atahualpa's guards and took the emperor prisoner. Atahualpa understood his situation. He offered Pizarro a deal. He would fill one room with gold and 2 additional rooms with silver in exchange for his freedom. The ransom he proposed was enormous. Pizarro agreed to the terms. Over the following months, gold and silver poured into Cajamarca from across the Inca Empire. Atahualpa's subjects brought treasures from temples and palaces. The rooms filled exactly as promised. The ransom was paid in full. Pizarro took the treasure but did not release the emperor. Instead, he put Atahualpa on trial for treason against the Spanish crown. The trial was a formality. The Spanish had already decided the outcome. They sentenced Atahualpa to be burned at the stake. The emperor was told he could avoid burning if he converted to Christianity. Burning was considered the worst possible death in Inca culture because it would prevent his body from being preserved. Atahualpa agreed to convert. A Spanish priest baptized him and gave him the Christian name Francisco. The method of his game over was changed from burning to strangulation. On July 26, 1533, Spanish soldiers strangled Emperor Atahualpa to death. His conversion to Christianity had spared him from the flames, but it did not spare his life. The Inca Empire fell into chaos without its leader. Pizarro took control of the vast territory and its remaining treasures, establishing Spanish rule over what had been the largest empire in the Americas. Kerman. On October 24, 1794, Aga Muhammad Khan Qajar besieged the city of Kerman in Persia. The city had remained loyal to the Zand dynasty during the Civil War. Qajar was fighting to eliminate the Zand rulers and establish his own dynasty. Kerman represented one of the last Zand strongholds. The city eventually fell to Qajar's forces. What followed was systematic vengeance for the inhabitants' loyalty to the Zand cause. Aga Muhammad Khan ordered his soldiers to gouge out the eyes of the male inhabitants of Kerman. The order was carried out across the city. The removed eyes were collected and poured into piles. Qajar then demanded that the eyes be weighed. He wanted verification that sufficient punishment had been inflicted for their resistance to his rule. Historical accounts confirm this weighing took place to measure the extent of the punishment. The last Zand ruler, Lutf Ali Khan, was captured shortly after Kerman's fall. He was blinded using the same method applied to Kerman's male population. He was then given a very uncomfortable time before being game overed. The Zand dynasty ended with Lutf Ali Khan's death. Aga Muhammad Khan Qajar established the Qajar dynasty in place of the fallen Zand rulers. The Qajar dynasty would go on to rule Persia for over a century. The fall of Kerman and the punishment inflicted on its inhabitants became one of the most notorious episodes in Persian history. The brutality served as a clear message to any other regions considering resistance to Qajar rule. The weighing of the removed eyes remained a particularly remembered detail of Qajar's revenge against the city that had supported his enemies. Otrar. In 1218, Ainulchuk served as governor of the city of Otrar in the Khwarezmian Empire. The city sat along important trade routes in what is now Kazakhstan. That year, a Mongol trade caravan arrived in Otrar carrying valuable goods. Ainulchuk made a decision that would doom his empire. He seized the entire caravan and claimed its contents for himself. News of the seizure reached Genghis Khan. The Mongol leader sent ambassadors to the Khwarezmian Shah, demanding the return of his merchants and goods. The Shah refused, and had the ambassadors killed. Genghis Khan responded by mobilizing his entire army. The Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire began in 1219. The Mongols reached Otrar and surrounded the city. Inalchuk commanded the garrison inside the walls. The siege lasted 5 months. Mongol forces bombarded the defenses and cut off all supplies. The city's walls eventually crumbled under the assault. In February of 1220, Mongol soldiers breached Otrar's defenses and poured into the city. Most of the garrison was killed during the final assault. Inalchuk was captured alive and brought before the Mongol commanders. Genghis Khan had given specific instructions regarding the governor's fate. Historical accounts report that the Mongols game-overed Inalchuk by pouring molten silver into his eyes and ears. This method was chosen as punishment for his greed in seizing the silver and gold from the trade caravan. The destruction of Otrar was only the beginning. The Mongol army swept through the entire Khwarezmian Empire over the following years. Every major city was besieged and destroyed. The empire that had ruled Central Asia completely collapsed. The Khwarezmian Shah died in exile. His empire was erased from the map. All of this destruction traced back to one governor's decision to seize a Mongol caravan in 1218. Talikota. On January 23, 1565, the Vijayanagara Empire faced a coalition of sultanates at the Battle of Talikota in southern India. Aliya Rama Raya commanded the Vijayanagara forces. He was 80 years old, but still led his army personally into battle. The empire had dominated the region for over 2 centuries, but internal conflicts had weakened its position. The battle began with both sides committing their full forces. Vijayanagara fielded a massive army, but the coalition had superior artillery and better coordination. The fighting was intense throughout the day. By afternoon, the battle had turned decisively against Vijayanagara. Their formations broke apart under sustained attacks from multiple directions. Ramaraya directed his forces from atop a war elephant. As the Vijayanagara lines collapsed, the old king attempted to retreat from the battlefield. His elephant suddenly refused to move forward. The animal would not respond to commands. Enemy soldiers surrounded the stationary elephant and pulled Ramaraya down from his position. The Sultan of Ahmednagar was present on the battlefield. He immediately ordered the captured king's game over. Soldiers beheaded Aliya Ramaraya on the spot. They mounted his severed head on a long spear and raised it high so both armies could see it. The sight of their ruler's head on display shattered what remained of Vijayanagara morale. The leaderless army fled in complete disorder. The coalition forces pursued them and captured the capital city of Hampi. What followed was 6 months of systematic looting and destruction. Soldiers stripped the city of its treasures and demolished its magnificent temples and palaces. The Vijayanagara Empire, which had stood for over 200 years, collapsed instantly after the death of Ramaraya. The empire fragmented into smaller kingdoms that would never regain the power or territory that Vijayanagara once held.